Okay, quick sound test. Does it work for everyone? Well, thank you so much for joining. It's a real privilege for me to be here. I've come all the way from England because Title I is such an amazing forum where we get to explore ways to support some of our most underserved students. So I'm the head of product at Wiz Education, and we partner with schools and districts and ministries of education around the world to systematically raise achievement in math. And we do this through our virtual tutoring service, MathWiz. So we have around 200,000 students globally who are on the MathWiz virtual tutor. Here in the US, we partner with over 200 schools, and that's around 24,000 students. So I'll say more on MathWiz a little later, but first I want to explore what it means to really achieve to really achieve in math. You see, I'm a retired mathematician, although it may be more accurate to think of me as a recovering mathematician, because it's not something you ever really get over. And growing up, I always felt the power and the beauty of math. But I was always surprised and perhaps a little frustrated that I was always in the minority. Most of my friends and family left school with a real fear and loathing of math. And that really bothered me. And I wanted to do something about it, because the only thing that gives me more joy than math itself is in sharing that power and beauty of math with others. So, you know, I'm just going to put it out there. I believe that everyone has the capacity to be a math genius. Now, I can see, just scanning the audience, that there are some skeptical faces here. So it's my job today to convince you all that you have math genius inside you. I'm going to show you, and you're going to feel it. And then I'll talk about how technology, when it's designed and implemented with the right intentions, can support teachers in helping to bring the math genius out of every child. Now, I realize these are very bold claims, and so I have to start by showing you what math genius looks like. I can't just bandy around these terms so loosely. So what does math genius look like? Well, to answer that, we're going to go back to the 1780s, where a math teacher in France gave this problem to his group of 8-year-old students. Now, it's understood that the math teacher was very busy. He had some marking to do, or perhaps preparing for whatever the equivalent of Common Core was back then. And he figured that this would keep his students occupied, because to sum the integers from 1 to 100 seems like it's going to take some time. We can go through this in turn, and then we'll find there are 99 different steps, and each time the numbers get larger and larger. And so he figured this would keep the students busy. But then within 2 minutes, one of those students, 8 years old, piped up and he declared the answer. And he was right. And that stunned the teacher. He was wondering how that was possible. Now, if that child had processed all of those calculations in 2 minutes, that would be impressive. But that wouldn't be genius. Any calculator can do that. Actually, what the child did was far more creative. So here's what he did. He took those numbers from 1 to 100 and he'd split them into two parts. So he kept the numbers from 1 to 50, and then he folded over the others. So he took the numbers from 51 to 100, he placed them right below in reverse order. And then he paired off these numbers in turn, and he noticed something very interesting. So when you take 1 and 100, they sum to 101. When you take 2 and 99, they also sum to 101. And in fact, you get 101 every time. And so summing the integers from 1 to 100 actually gives you 50 copies of 101. And that's how that 8-year-old boy solved that problem in under 2 minutes. Now, that boy, by the way, was Carl Friedrich Gauss. He would go on to become one of the great mathematicians. He's known as the Prince of Mathematicians. And this was an early sign of his math genius, because he didn't just accept that problem as it was given to him. He looked deep inside its structure. He twisted it, he folded it, and he bent those numbers to his will. So that was Gauss. And now it's our turn. We're going to produce our own moment of math genius. Now, one of the great things about math is that it's not just about answering questions, you can also ask them. So we've summed the first 100 integers, but now let's try summing the first 100 odd integers. So we'll start with 1 and 3 and 5, and we'll end up at around the 200 mark. What do we get this time? Now, your first thought may be to do what Gauss did. Maybe apply a similar approach. And that would probably work. That would probably give us the answer. But you know, that was Gauss's moment of brilliance. Let's come up with our own. Now, looking at this, there's nothing to do but to do it. So let's go through some of these terms one at a time, and let's just stay alert to anything that may seem curious or familiar. So we'll start with 1, and then we'll add the next odd number along, and we'll get 4. And we'll add the next odd number, and we'll get 9, and then 16. Well, that's interesting, because those numbers do look a little familiar. 1, 4, 9, 16. We've seen them somewhere before. They're the square numbers. Well, hold on. We were summing the odd integers. Where did square numbers suddenly come from? Who invited them to the party? Well, they're here, and now we need to figure out why. It's the most important question any mathematician can ask. Why, when we add those odd integers, do we get the square numbers? Well, let's think about it for a moment. They're called square numbers for a reason. Why are they called square numbers? Well, it's because they arise as the areas of squares. So 4 is the area of a 2 by 2 square. 9 is the area of a 3 by 3 square, and so on. But why do we keep getting the squares? Now, we can look at this page long and hard, and we can wait for inspiration to hit us. We could be here a while. So let's do something. Let's visualize the problem. They're square numbers, so maybe we can draw them. Let's give that a go. And it may help. It may reveal something. And it may not. But we're mathematicians. We're driven by our curiosity. And so we're just going to give it a shot. And so here's 1. Then we'll add the 3. And you can see we get the square. We get 5, and we get the next square along. And then we add the 7, and we get the next square along. And we're still trying to figure out why. Why do we keep getting squares? Well, now that we've visualized the problem, that connection is starting to slowly reveal itself. We can sense that link between odd numbers and squares. It's gradually dawning on us. But maybe we're not quite there. Maybe we can't quite put our finger on it. So let's go through it again. And this time we're going to add some color, just in case it helps. So there's 1. And now we'll add the 3. And we'll add the 5. And we'll add the 7. And I can see just by looking at you that that moment is arriving. That aha moment when we understand why we're seeing that link, because adding an odd number is actually giving us the next layer of that square. It's giving us that kind of reverse L shape. And that's confirmed when we think about what the next square along looks like. It needs 5 spots along the bottom, 4 along the top, and that's the same as adding 9. Well, now we can answer our question. Because to sum the first 100 odd integers, we're just going to turn it into a 100 by 100 square, and the area of that square is 10,000. So that's the answer, 10,000. But the answer's not what's important here, because think about what just happened. We started off with an arithmetic problem. We were summing odd integers. They were just symbols on a page. And look where we ended. We turned it into a geometry problem. We connected those 2 topics, arithmetic and geometry, that are usually kept separate. We actually discovered the geometry of odd numbers. And it all came about because of our curiosity, because of our willingness to explore and to experiment. And that is mathematical genius in a nutshell. And we all have it within us. And yet so few people go through life thinking that they're math geniuses. Well, why? Well, I think one of the reasons is that math genius is very fragile. It slips through very easily. There are so many barriers that people face to realizing their talents. And we can see that even by looking at some of the great mathematicians and some of the challenges that they faced. So this is Jacques Hadamard, a French mathematician from the 19th and 20th centuries. He went on to study prime numbers, and he's known as one of the greatest number theorists of all time. But he once wrote that up until 5th grade, he was placed towards the bottom of his class in arithmetic. How about Hermann Grassmann, the German polymath, one of the founding fathers of linear algebra? He also struggled with math early on, so much so that his father advised him, he instructed him not to pursue math. He told him to do something more hands-on, like gardening. And there's nothing wrong with gardening, but imagine how devastating that would have been to his confidence. How about Ramanujan? Born and raised in rural India into poverty, where he had a very substandard education, and one day he stumbled upon a primitive and outdated math textbook, and from that single text, he was able to derive deep mathematical theorems, many of them unknown at the time. So Ramanujan wrote up his ideas, and he sent his manuscripts over to England, and eventually they found their way to G.H. Hardy, a math professor at Trinity College, Cambridge. And Hardy looked at those manuscripts, and he could see Ramanujan's genius, so he invited him over to England, and they enjoyed one of the finest collaborations in all of math. And lastly, and this is my favorite example, Sophie Germain. So this is now the late 18th, early 19th century, again in France. She discovered her love and her talent for math in the textbooks of her father's library. And she was so committed, so passionate, that she actually taught herself Greek and Latin in order to access those textbooks. But this was 18th century Europe, where it was uncouth for women to do math, even to the extent that her parents banned her. They forbade her from doing math. Well, she did it anyway. She stayed up into the late hours of the night. She would hide under her quilt. She had only a candle as a source of light, and she would absorb those textbooks. And eventually, her parents relented. These four mathematicians prevailed, thankfully. They prevailed through their resistance and perseverance. They prevailed through luck, through a leap of faith here, maybe even some divine intervention, but they are the exceptions. Because for their successors, there are millions more people who go through life without having their talents realized. Now here we are in 2017, and things are better for sure, but we know that those barriers of poverty, of gender stereotypes, of negative expectations all persist today. It's one of the reasons we're all here. We know that too many students go through life without having their talent fulfilled. They slip through too easily. And that's the reason Whiz Education exists. We were founded 12 years ago on the belief, very simple belief, that every child deserves a learning experience that supports their individual needs and pace of learning. We believe that every child should leave school feeling like they're a math genius. And we know that one of the challenges is that math genius is built off of solid foundations. Every student needs a core of knowledge and skills. Because think about that problem that we just solved. To understand that problem and to engage with it, we needed to know what odd numbers were. We needed to know how to carry out basic addition. And we needed that familiarity with square numbers. They were the building blocks. And we combined those building blocks to produce our moment of genius. But if you don't have those building blocks to begin with, then problem solving and reasoning and genius is all a distant dream. And we know that too many students go through school without having those secure building blocks. And so that's why we created our virtual tutor. It's an online adaptive math tutor, and it's fully automated, but it's designed to behave like a human tutor, to give students that targeted support and to secure those foundations. So when students first sign up to MathWiz, they receive an initial diagnostic assessment, and the tutor maps their strengths and weaknesses across several math topics. And then it calculates their overall ability in math, which we call their math age, which is very similar to reading age. And the tutor captures all of those interactions, and it reveals some startling insights, like this one. This says that there's a spread of learning needs in every class. This is actually a typical 5th grade math class. Now, this is real data. We have permission from the school to share this. It's all anonymized for privacy. Now, each of those icons is a student, and this scale plots their overall math ability. And you can see that there's over 4 years separating the highest achieving students from the lowest achieving ones. And that already underscores the challenge for math educators. How do you deliver an educational experience that supports every one of those students where they are? Now, we work in thousands of schools across the world, and that trend, that multi-year gap, is consistent all across the world. And in fact, the challenge runs much deeper than we might think. Because it may seem that only a few students are in need of special attention, maybe those 3 struggling students at the low end and that high achieving one at the top end. But actually, every one of those students has fundamental gaps in their knowledge. And to see this, we're going to take 2 students from within that middle cluster. Now remember, this is real data, but we've anonymized the name. So this is Nancy. So this was Nancy's learning profile from 2 years ago when she first started on MathWiz. These are the different curriculum topics along the side, and those gray bars show us where Nancy was placed in her initial assessment. Now she was around 7.5 at the time, and you can see that she had a jagged learning profile, different strengths and weaknesses. In most topics, she was within the expected range of ability, except for place value. In place value, she had a math age of close to 5, more than 2 years behind. Now, how does that happen? Well, maybe Nancy was absent the week they taught place value in school. Or maybe she just didn't fundamentally grasp the concept of hundreds and tens and ones. Well, we've seen that math topics are deeply interconnected. And so if that gap is left unaddressed, it will amplify over time, and it will cripple Nancy's development later on. So that's Nancy. And now we're going to look at Liam. Now, Liam's in the same class as Nancy, so he has the same teacher, same learning environment, same support and instruction. Now look at Liam's learning profile. It's vastly different to Nancy's. Place value was her weakest topic. It was one of Liam's strongest. And in fact, if we went through the whole class, we'd find 30 students with 30 distinct sets of learning needs. And so we need to develop 30 personalized learning plans. Now, with 24 hours in a day and the best will in the world, that seems impossible. But that's where virtual tutoring comes in, because now that the MathWiz tutor has identified each child's knowledge gaps, it can deliver lessons in sequence based on their specific needs. So Nancy will receive more attention in place value, Liam in fractions, and so on. And the tutor will continuously adapt that learning journey based on each child's progress. Now, here's a snapshot of what the lessons look like. They're very colorful and animated. They're rich and interactive, and they really bring math to life. And I have to say, this is what math should look like. This is what math has always looked like to me. Numbers and shapes have been dancing around in my head since I was 3. And the tutor uses a very balanced pedagogy, so it's giving students the secure foundations of knowledge. Now, broadly speaking, there are 3 kinds of mathematical knowledge. There's factual knowledge, the basic truths of math. And there's procedural knowledge, knowing how to combine mathematical objects. And there's conceptual knowledge, understanding the structures that govern the mathematical universe. So it's the what, the how, and the why of math. And the research is very clear that you have to develop those 3 types of knowledge in parallel because they all support and reinforce one another. So let's see now the impact that the tutor has had on Nancy. So she's been on MathWiz for around 2 years, and those blue bars show us her improvement in each topic. Look at place value. Nancy now enjoys a much more rounded learning profile because the tutor has compensated for her weaker areas. It's the same for Liam. And these visuals are really quite powerful. They embody that growth mindset that we know is so important. They show us that every child can enjoy steady, continuous growth once they have that dedicated one-to-one support. And our research shows that students who spend 45 to 60 minutes a week on MathWiz accelerate their learning by 18 months in their first year. And most importantly, the tutor is feeding these reports back to teachers. They can access class dashboards, and they can approach their lesson planning armed with actionable insights on students' learning. Now, when it's done well, this can be a game changer for teachers, because we know that today too many teachers are overstretched. They're overstretched and burdened with the tasks of assessment and data collection, of identifying their students' needs. Well, now they can delegate as much of that as they need to the virtual tutor, and it really then frees up teachers to focus on those richer aspects of their role and to really deepen their classroom instruction. Now, we can aggregate these insights on any level that we like. So let's go all the way to the top, all the way to our global community of learners. So MathWiz is in 9 international regions. And for each of those regions, we can calculate how far off, on average, our students are from our international standard. So this shows that regional comparison. Each of those icons is now a region. So the US is in that cluster somewhere. That region drifting on the far left is Kenya. Because in Kenya, we're involved in a large-scale international aid project where we're delivering MathWiz to rural communities, some of the most deprived schools you can imagine. And their students, on average, are almost 5 years behind our international standard. Now, within the US, we can drill down as deep as we need to. So I'll just give you a snapshot of all of our schools in the US. That's a quick comparison of their progress. And we can look at many different things. We can monitor their usage. And all of this is being updated in real time as a byproduct of students learning. And we make this available to our partners. We have our customer support team that's looking at these reports every minute of every day. We're using data in a very proactive way so that we can monitor which schools are adopting MathWiz, which schools are making good progress, which ones are in more need of intervention. And we can look at subgroups of schools and students. We can compare males and females. We can compare different demographics, Title I students. We can slice and dice the data in any way that we like. And what we've realized over the years is that behind every one of these millions of data points, there's a human story. And our job as educators is to connect with that human story. Now, I experienced this myself firsthand last year when I visited one of our schools in Seattle. And I had the great pleasure of meeting a young boy who we'll call Joshua. And the principal introduced me to Joshua, and he had asked me to look through Joshua's reports beforehand, because Joshua had just been awarded a prize at his school for achieving the highest progress on MathWiz that semester. So I did. I looked through his reports, and I managed to make all kinds of inferences. I picked out his strongest and weakest areas. I even managed to figure out what his favorite topics were. And I figured he had a very consistent and disciplined work ethic. And all of that was confirmed when I spoke with Joshua. And then after he left, the principal told me something else, something I'd missed, something the data would never reveal. And that's that Joshua is homeless. Well, I was a bit stunned. I can't fathom that in 2017, a young, hardworking American boy has no home to call his own. Well, it turns out that Joshua lives in a hostel. He shares a single bedroom with his mum and his 3 siblings. He has no computer, so his mum takes him to the community library every week to get his MathWiz usage up. And when Joshua goes to school, he has dedicated time on MathWiz because they've imbibed it as part of their daily schedule. And I tell you what, if it takes a village to raise a child, then it surely takes an entire community of educators to help them fulfill their math potential. And so what we've realized over the years is that these technologies are only meaningful and powerful when they're in the hands of educators, when we put teachers in control and help them to uncover the human story behind that data. And so we abide by 3 very clear principles when we work with schools. One is to give teachers and principals the space to apply that data within their unique context. We give teachers the time to look inside the black box of our tutoring algorithm so they have full transparency of the learning that students are doing online. And lastly, we give teachers the freedom to direct the tutors so that the tutor is at their service, supporting their specific curriculum goals. And what we found is that when these 3 conditions are enabled, math class can be a very exciting place to be, full of rich interactions and deeper problem solving. So I'm going to start, as I finished, with a math problem. And this is one of my favorite. You have 4 copies of the number 1, 2, 3, 4. You have to rearrange the digits in each copy so that these 4 numbers sum to 9,000. So if we take the numbers as they are, we're some way off the target. If we reverse the digits in the top number, we're much closer. And the goal is to hit 9,000 dead on. It's a wonderful problem. There's lots of interesting surprises and twists. Now imagine if we gave that problem to Nancy 2 years ago. Well, that would be futile. She would struggle with that helplessly, because remember that one of her real weak areas was place value. And to engage with this problem, you need a good understanding of place value. You need to know what those columns are, and you need to understand how to perform operations around them. But now that the tutor has filled her knowledge gaps, and has given her those secure foundations, this could be the perfect problem for Nancy. She can attempt it off the back of those solid foundations. And that's how technology can help every child become a math genius, by securing those building blocks and by enabling this kind of deeper problem solving, and by empowering teachers with richer lesson planning and deeper instruction. Because in the end, and this is so important, in the end, it's only teachers who will drive the engagement revolution. Thank you very much. So I don't know if we have a few minutes for questions. I'll gladly take them. But I want to, Josh, if you can raise your hand. If you can all say hi to Josh. Josh is exhibiting today on behalf of Wiz. So please say hello to Josh and leave your name and email address. We're offering some free subscriptions. Is that right, Josh? There you go. So that's Josh. But I'll be around too, so please come say hi. Thank you so much for attending.